She ruled with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. A woman who outlived assassins, defeated the Spanish Armada, and defied the expectations of a world built by men. But even the most powerful monarch cannot escape the clutches of time. As her glory faded, and those she loved slipped into the grave, Queen Elizabeth I descended into a haunting solitude. Behind closed palace doors, the once mighty Virgin Queen became a ghost, starving, silent, and staring into the abyss. This is the story of her terrifying final days and the darkness that consumed her. She had risen from scandal and near death to command one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. Daughter of and Bullen, who had lost her head to a king's lust and rage, Elizabeth was never meant to rule. Declared illegitimate, locked away, whispered about, her youth was marked by danger. But through cunning, courage, and a terrifying intelligence, she emerged from the shadows. When she took the throne at 25, she was radiant, crowned in golden robes, speaking Latin, French, and power all at once. Men feared her, others adored her, but no one could ignore her. For decades, Elizabeth wielded authority with unmatched charisma and ruthless calculation. She was both king and queen in one body, unmarried, unbending, untouched by any man's rule. She survived papal excommunications, political conspiracies, and dozens of plots to kill her. She turned England from a weakened, fractured kingdom into a Protestant powerhouse. And yet, with every year of her reign, the world around her changed. Her body weakened, her inner circle thinned, and the face in the mirror, once so carefully composed, began to crack. Robert Dudley had been her son, her companion since youth, her trusted advisor, the man she had loved in secret and never married. His death in 1588 had shattered something within her. The letter he sent her days before his passing was found hidden among her possessions, so worn from handling, its ink had begun to fade. She kept it with her always. And after him came his stepson, the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux. Young, charming, defiant. She raised him as a favorite, indulged him with offices and wealth. But ambition poisoned his heart, and rebellion made her hand heavy. In 1601, after his failed uprising, she signed his death warrant. He died by the axe, and with him, Elizabeth's will to live began to decay. From that moment forward, she became more isolated, more withdrawn. Her courtiers noticed she laughed less, smiled less. The court, once filled with music, poetry, and sharp political drama, grew quieter. Elizabeth still appeared in public, still gave the occasional speech, still adorned herself in majestic gowns with wide ruffs and glittering jewels. But it was all illusion. Behind her painted mask, a slow collapse had begun. She wore her past like armor, but that armor was eroding. Her once piercing eyes were now sunken, and her famously high forehead had become a canvas for white lead paint, ceruse, that masked the blotches and decay of age. Her teeth, blackened and falling out, made her self-conscious. She began to speak less in public. The hair beneath her wigs had long since thinned, leaving her scalp raw and sensitive. But vanity drove her to preserve the image of majesty. Even as her health declined, she refused to let anyone see her in anything less than full regalia. Each appearance was an act of defiance, a final performance. But performances require energy, and that energy was running out. By 1602, the Queen's mood had grown darker. Her attendants noticed she would stare for long periods at nothing. At times, she whispered to herself. She stopped enjoying the entertainments she had once demanded. No masks, no music, no dancing. Instead, she wandered the halls of her palaces, often at night, refusing sleep. Her counselors worried, but none dared challenge her. Elizabeth had long ruled by fear and favor. Even in her frailty, she could dismiss or punish those who annoyed her. She began to speak of omens, of dreams, of ghosts. "I am tied with a chain of iron about my neck," she whispered to one of her ladies-in-waiting. No one could tell whether it was poetry or a confession. The death of Essex haunted her. She had loved him in her own strange way. Some said she saw his ghost in her rooms at Whitehall. Others said she cursed his name. The queen, who once silenced ambassadors with her stare, now spent hours in melancholic silence. Winter deepened, and with it, her sorrow. She refused food. She turned away from her physicians. She allowed no one to undress her, to touch her. When a courtier suggested she retire to bed, she recoiled and replied, "Must I be gone and laid in the dust?" To Elizabeth, lying down was to surrender. To lie in bed was to lie in a grave. So she stood, or sat, for hours, days, refusing to sleep, refusing comfort. In February 1603, the queen relocated to Richmond Palace, perhaps hoping the countryside would restore her spirits. But the darkness followed her. Her face was pale and gaunt. She spoke little. Her fingers trembled when she held her quill. Messages were sent to her council, but her signature wavered, each letter a ghost of its former self. Those closest to her said she looked hollow, as if her soul had already begun to drift from her body. It was there, at Richmond, that she began her final descent. She would not eat. She would not dress. Her ladies, in tears, begged her to rest, to allow the physicians to examine her. But she waved them off with the flick of a skeletal hand. She sat in her chamber, upright, motionless, surrounded by silence. Sometimes she would mutter prayers. Sometimes she wept. But more often, she just stared into space, as if watching something no one else could see. For days passed. For nights. She did not move. The cold crept through the palace. Her body weakened. Her eyes dulled. But she remained defiant. Courtiers watched from the shadows, whispering. Would she rise again? Would she speak? But the queen was already departing, piece by piece. The Elizabeth they had known, the brilliant strategist, the eloquent orator, the iron-willed monarch, had dissolved into a whisper of a woman. Still, she refused to lie down. March dragged its shadow across the cold stones of Richmond Palace, and with it came the undeniable sense that something ancient, something eternal, was unraveling. Elizabeth, Queen of England, was dying, but death would not come swiftly. It stalked her with deliberate patience, respecting her defiance, knowing it would win eventually. Inside her chamber, the great canopy bed stood untouched. Dust gathered at its feet. The tapestries, once vivid with the threads of royal hunts and mythical beasts, now hung limp in the heavy silence. The fire in the hearth sputtered, casting dim light on the motionless form of the queen, who sat upright on her cushions, wrapped in velvet robes that could no longer warm her. She had not slept in days. She had not eaten. Her body, once dressed in splendor and carried with pride through palaces and parliaments, was now a husk, fragile and cold. Her ladies waited in silence, their hands folded, their eyes wide with helplessness. The queen would not speak to them. She would not let them touch her. Any suggestion to lie in bed, to rest, was met with a sharp shake of her head or a whisper of disdain. She would not go willingly. She would not be seen lying like a sick woman, like one of the countless others she had outlived. She had buried rivals, pretenders, lovers. She had buried her enemies. She would not let them, even in memory, see her broken. And yet, she was breaking. Her body sagged forward slightly now, the spine beginning to bend under the weight of its refusal to collapse. Her skin, pale as parchment, had lost all warmth. Her lips had faded to a bluish hue. Her eyes, rimmed in red, no longer focused on those who came to kneel before her. Some believed she was hallucinating. Others whispered that she saw visions, spirits of those she had loved and lost. Robert Dudley, Essex, her mother, perhaps, or worse, her father, Henry VIII, whose shadow had followed her for a lifetime. Outside her chamber, the court moved slowly and carefully. Ministers whispered in corridors. A question hovered in every corner. Who would be next? There was no child, no husband, no heir she had chosen with finality. Elizabeth had ruled alone, and she had kept the matter of succession as ambiguous as her heart. But the world would not wait for a crown to float in uncertainty. On the fourth night of her vigil, as exhaustion consumed those around her, Robert Cecil, the Queen's closest advisor, was called to her side. It was said that she could no longer speak, but when he knelt, and asked her once again who should succeed her, she moved one finger. Upward. A simple motion. Some said it was a gesture toward heaven. Others believed it was her final approval of James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, a man whose mother she had ordered executed, a man who had waited in quiet patience across the border. It was enough. The council took it as her will. Elizabeth was now breathing in shallow gasps. Her posture slumped more with each passing hour. She could no longer sit upright without assistance, but still she resisted the bed. Her mind had begun to slip entirely. Her eyes moved restlessly beneath drooping lids, and her hands, once precise and commanding, now trembled against her robe. Her ladies, unable to bear it, began to sob. But even then, they kept their distance. The Queen of England had ruled by fear and by awe. That awe had not yet lifted, even as her soul hovered on the edge. At last, sometime near midnight on March 23rd, they convinced her to lie down. It was not victory, it was surrender. Her limbs were so rigid from days of stillness that the process was painful. She winced, perhaps for the first time in days. They eased her down onto the bed she had so fiercely avoided. The silk sheets were drawn over her, and she lay there, finally still, finally silent. The Queen slept, but it was not sleep. It was the slow breath of the dying, the faint movement of lungs preparing for their final collapse. The once great monarch, who had spoken with thunder at Tilbury, whose words had cowed the House of Lords, now whispered nonsense to no one. Her mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Her body, long defiant, no longer obeyed her. As the candlelight dimmed and the dawn began to peek behind the curtains, Elizabeth took her final breath. It came without fanfare, without words. No final command, no grand declaration, just an exhale, a soft, mortal surrender. It was the morning of March 24th, 1603. The Queen was gone. Her body was left untouched for hours. No one dared disturb her. Eventually, her chief lady-in-waiting gently removed the rings from her fingers, one by one. The famous coronation ring, which had grown into the flesh of her finger over 44 years of rule, was pried loose. Her wigs were taken away. Her white-painted face was wiped clean. And beneath all the layers, beneath the crowns, the gowns, the symbols of power, lay a small, aged woman. Frail, cold, human. The court moved quickly. James of Scotland was declared King of England. Messengers rode through the country. Bells rang out, not just in mourning, but in transition. The Tudor line had ended. A new era had begun. And yet, the people wept. In London, crowds gathered in silence. Shops closed their doors. Elizabeth had ruled nearly half a century. Most of her subjects had never known another monarch. She was legend, myth, monarch. And now, she was memory. Her funeral procession was held weeks later. White horses pulled her coffin, draped in purple velvet, through the streets of London. The crowd was enormous, silent, mournful. Behind the carriage rode nobles, bishops, knights, the archbishop, the privy council, the same men who had once danced in her court, who had laughed at her wit and trembled at her anger. Now they followed her casket as mourners. At Westminster Abbey, beneath the great vaulted ceilings and the echoes of sacred hymns, Elizabeth was laid to rest. She was buried in the same tomb as her half-sister Mary, the woman who had once imprisoned her. Now they lay side by side, the Catholic and the Protestant, the Queen of Fire and the Queen of Ashes. In death, the bloodline of Henry VIII had folded into stone. But even buried, Elizabeth remained. Her story endured, not in children or husbands, but in the legacy she forged from will alone. A queen who ruled without a king, a woman who defied her era, and a monarch who, in the end, faced death as she had faced life, alone, unbending, and terrifyingly human.